with that, I'm going to hand it over to you just to kick us off.
Excellent. Thanks, Ellen. And I'm going to start today's session by talking through a few facts. So before COVID-19 hit, the research that we at Verint conducted through the Verint Experience Index showed that 47% of respondents who contacted customer support did so because they were unable to complete their desired task through digital channels. That's right, 47%. It's a huge number, and it's a key driver of less than satisfactory customer experiences. Fast forward to where we are today, because of store and branch closures in particular, the current situation has led to a dramatic increase in digital interactions and a significant increase in contact center interactions. And as you'd expect, we've seen a spike in customer feedback across both digital and contact center channels. Digital feedback jumped 29% in March as compared to February, and April looks like it will show an even greater increase. So bottom line, this is an emotional time for all of us as consumers, as individuals, and your customers want to talk to you right now about what's going on. The priority for CX pros is to design great experiences, and we do that so that we can drive customer loyalty and decrease operational costs. You need to capture, consolidate, and analyze feedback across channels, which will help guide both tactical as well as strategic decisions within your business. And now more than ever, you as CX professionals must ensure that you're listening to your customers so that you understand what they want and need right now in those highly emotional interactions that they're having, given what's going on. And you need to be able to listen to them through whatever channels you have available. You need to connect the listening and actions across the two interaction channels that are most important right now. As Ellen talked about, digital and contact center, that's where the volume's spiking. And you need to focus on tactical break-fix issues as well as operational improvements, because that's really where customers are getting hung up right now. And that's what's required to service your customers and to survive as a business right now. As you look beyond the current situation, you don't want to overlook the long run. We all need to shift or start shifting to what things could look like post the current COVID-19 situation. You as CX professionals must ensure that you're listening to your customers across channels and across data sources. We all have lots of data at our disposal that either we don't know exists, or more commonly, we just don't have access to it because of organizational silos or technology limitations. Oftentimes, step one in getting access to this data is a concerted effort to connect CX initiatives across channels and departments. And then once you have a more complete view of the customer, then you have the ability to prioritize tactical and operational fixes as well as strategic investment decisions. And if your organization's like ours is today, then the current situation has most likely given you and your team a bigger seat at the table now because of how much your organization is focusing on the customer experience during this crisis. We all know that collaboration across the enterprise is one of those major roadblocks to delivering great customer experiences. We've all been there as CX professionals, and that's what we're here to discuss today. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Faith.
Thank you, Ben. And as Ellen had alluded to when we first kicked off, when we asked CX professionals which of following significant obstacles to improve CX stands in your way of delivering that great CX, 45% said that cooperation was lacking. And instead of this improving over the last 2 years, unfortunately, we've actually seen that things have gotten worse. Back in 2017, this number was 36%. So instead of getting better, things are actually getting worse. And this is because of this. It's not uncommon for multiple teams to be approaching customer experience, and they're ultimately doing their own thing. Many times, as Ben alluded to, in isolation of one another. Contact center teams, which provide a wealth of information and are a huge opportunity for enterprises and should be a CX hub, as I like to say, are not often a part of CX efforts. And if they are, the focus is often on a post-call survey rather than the actual interactions itself. Digital teams, as Ben also said, they continue to do their own thing. Sometimes when the data and insights even point to another part of the organization, they simply don't share the information. Social's not always integrated and is yet another siloed effort. Complaints aren't often included. The list goes on. So what that leads to, and this is always one of my favorite slides to use, is it just simply leads to this, a very disconnected, fragmented approach to customer experience. And this ultimately creates a struggle to improve and transform your CX. One thing that companies actually forget too is that this approach, it actually might create a bad customer experience. Think about it, your customers view you as one company, oftentimes one brand, and this approach might highlight the internal disconnects that exist. Too many requests for feedback, for example. I was at a conference, I guess it was maybe almost 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, where one company used the example of 100 surveys going to one customer in a month. And this was essentially their demand for change because they realized that that was not a great experience that they were putting forth. Different branding efforts of the surveys. For example, this was an insurance company. They had a team that went rogue and conducted an effort, and it looked like it was completely off-brand. It actually drove up call volumes to the call center and actually cost them more money because people thought it was fraud or a scheme. It leads to inconsistent metrics. You don't have that consistency. You can't compare and trend. Your customers often feel like they're repeating themselves. Now, I won't shame anybody here, but many people have heard this example from me if they've ever had a conversation with me because it just really pushes me. I had one company send me 4 surveys in a day. Meanwhile, I also had probably spoken with their customer service team 4 or 5 times. Never was that loop closed. So to me, it set the expectation that they really didn't care about my feedback. It was going in a black hole. So why would I want to give that company any business? There's no single version of the truth as far as how customers actually will perceive your brand. There's that perception that a company, candidly, doesn't have their act together. There could be a struggle to become more customer-centric. And note, in addition to that challenge that I noted about the lack of collaboration, the second challenge was the lack of a customer-centric culture. And Ben talked about this too. There's often a lack of outcomes. You can't see the benefits when you're going about things in more of a find and fix manner within different silos. So it's a lose-lose when you take this approach, and you absolutely have to change. So this means that you actually have to approach transformation in a very different way. And it means putting CX front and center. It means taking what you're already doing and really striving to do more with it and connect the dots and not being able to, and being willing, to drive more change. It means doing something different. It means connecting the dots. And Ben, I think you might have a story here that you might want to share.
Yeah, I would say more of an observation. It's unfortunate that the current crisis has to be the catalyst for organizations to change. But for many organizations, if they don't do just that right now, they're going to have a tough time surviving and thriving in the future because their customers will go elsewhere. One of the things we're seeing a lot from our customers is that they're setting up, or they have already set up, COVID-19 war rooms. And these war rooms often include a daily stand-up meeting where executives are discussing the state of the business. And with many of our customers, who are CX professionals, they have a seat at the table during these daily stand-up meetings with executives that maybe they've met before, but certainly haven't spent a lot of time with on a daily basis talking about the customer. So maybe this is a first step towards CX leaders having a seat at the table, which I think we all agree is very important to drive customer experience forward.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Which I think is a great segue into the next couple of slides. A lot of companies are embarking on CX efforts, but many companies, and these are the first two levels of VOC programs. We talk about foundational and advanced programs, and then setting the stage to be able to get to state of the art. But the fact is, most companies are actually sitting between these two phases. And it's unfortunate given the investments that have been being made. We see a lot of companies that are still very survey obsessed, and they're not tapping into the wealth of information and data that exists throughout the organization, often because they're not connecting those dots. We see a lot of efforts that are still very ad hoc and not really formal, not very programmatic. We see a lot of companies that still, and it breaks my heart because it should be just a standard part of this, a formal closed loop process for both that inner and that outer loop. And companies are still struggling to show the value of customer experience. So we're seeing some companies then, at least finally start to embark on some of these activities for level 2, but it's oftentimes really not at scale. So tapping into that unstructured and unsolicited feedback, being able to connect to some data dots, so to speak. You're definitely not achieving that full data integration here. It's, I always say Rome wasn't built in a day, and you have to build a phased approach. So bringing in that contact center data, huge opportunity with both structured and unstructured feedback. We've also seen companies lose sight of the voice of the employee. Now, one thing I want to call out here is, there's this big focus on employee experience now in many companies, but when that happens, so many organizations ultimately lose the opportunity to connect to that frontline feedback or that sales rep feedback that also can ultimately be really impactful when it comes to improving the customer experience. So having it essentially be that voice of the customer through the employee, and not just that voice of the employee as it relates to the employee experience that they have. In addition, we've also seen, a lot of companies that think that they're ready for state of the art, but they're not doing all of these things. So it means that you actually have to aim for that more holistic approach and start to fill all the gaps and essentially, check all of these boxes before you're able to get to that next step.
And
Ben,
certainly,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, certainly many companies are on the journey from level 1 up to level 3, and I'll make probably a pretty bad analogy comparing VOC maturity with building a house. And I'm doing a renovation on my home right now, so everything that comes into my mind is about houses. But anyhow, before you can build an addition on your house, you need a strong foundation. And as it relates to VOC, companies have to get these foundational components right before they can move to being state of the art. And current situation's forcing a lot of companies to get back to the basics of and getting the basics of CX right, particularly on their digital and their contact center channels. So while accelerated digital transformation is good for us as consumers, it's difficult to be a consumer when the companies you're interacting with are playing catch up because they're behind. So whether it's trying to do new things on a banking website, which I've had to do over the last month, or helping my parents order groceries for the first time through their iPhone, the digital interactions are spiking and lots of things are breaking. So a lot of what our Verint Experience Cloud customers are focusing on right now is focusing their CX efforts on ensuring that their customers can complete their desired tasks. So said in another way, they're focusing on solving the tactical and operational issues that customers are bubbling up. Nancy Port, who's Verint's VP of Customer Experience, calls these components of a program a find and fix program. And customers are using different sources of customer data to help them find where these problems exist. So they're using surveys, which all of us are very familiar with, but they're also really leveraging behavioral analytics on websites and speech and text analytics in the contact center in elsewhere to bubble up what the issues are. And then they're able to combine that with operational data to size the issue. So how much is it going to cost to fix, and what's the what's the benefit, and they can rank and prioritize the fixes and fix the priority issues that have the best ROI. And I don't know about everyone out there, but I'm certainly seeing a lot of the best brands that I work with pushing out apps to the mobile app, to the website, very, very quickly. And it's nice to see that some customers were ready for this and really had good programs in place to be able to change quickly.
Oh, and I absolutely think that because they've been able to do that, it's ultimately a stepping stone for that next level state of the art, which ultimately means having that ability to do more, connecting all of those data dots that you had referred to, operational data, many cases financial data. Sometimes if you're a heavily regulated industry and extremely risk averse, that might not be done in these technologies. But also it's maximizing features and functionality of the tools that you're using. So for example, this was a customer who started with a very survey-focused program, but because of the vendor that they had selected, they were able to tap into that power of speech analytics as well. Being able to prioritize more effectively and having something that is truly embedded in a part of the process. Actually, at a Forrester conference, and I believe the Variant conference last year, I'd asked a question about how many people have what they would deem to be a sophisticated prioritization framework. And the amount of hands, which was well under 5 in both environments that went up, was just shocking to me, because how can you actually prove and deliver that business outcome and that impact if you're not actually prioritizing things effectively? And if you're just throwing spaghetti to the wall and expecting it to stick, as I like to say. You have to have those sophisticated business value calculations. Again, you'll probably hear that from me 10 more times throughout the rest of this webinar, is you have to show the impact and value of customer experience. That culture impact is crucial. You have to be able to spread the word and share with other people, not only what your customers think about you, and it could be the good and the bad things. What are you doing well, and where is there opportunity to improve? So really creating an environment of CX advocates within your organization that really demand that VOC. One of my favorite things to hear is when, maybe it was a holiday and the CX team was a day or two late with getting things ready for, to share, or sending out a dashboard, or sending out a deeper dive report. And people come to them saying, well, where is it? Because I need it to do my job. That's just a very rewarding time for, I think, a CX practitioner. And then really embedding that voice of the customer into your design efforts, whether it be product, experience, et cetera. It's really crucial to leverage that voice. Otherwise, you might potentially miss the mark. Do you agree, Ben?
Yeah, I completely agree. And Vera Bradley is one of our Variant Experience Cloud customers. And anyone who has ever done business with them knows that they've been customer obsessed from the beginning. But their formal voice of customer program is relatively new. But despite that, it's pretty mature. They have strong executive leadership support for their CX efforts. So this has certainly helped them and break down the silos and get everyone to rally around the program. They do have a chief customer officer, and their chief customer officer, as well as their CEO, attends the quarterly CX readout meetings that we run with them in partnership with their team and the Variant CX consulting team. And they follow a lot of the best practices that Faith has outlined across level 1, 2, and 3. First of all, at the most basic level, they're listening to customers across a huge portion of their customer touch points, whether it's website, whether it's the mobile app, whether it's in-store, whether it's the contact center. They do a great job of making sure that customers have the opportunity to be heard when and where they want to be heard. Number 2, their key stakeholders partner across silos to deliver great customer experiences. As I said, they have good, strong senior leadership helping drive that. But they've seen the benefits, and maybe it started a little slow, all of the partnering, but they've done a great job of moving beyond those initial challenges and really driving great customer value. And one of the things that they're doing to do that and really take out of some of the heavy lifting out of the partnering is they're maximizing the capabilities in their Experience Cloud offering to drive the collaboration. So for example, they leverage our leaderboard dashboards across these customer touchpoints. So departments can see how they're doing against their peers, how different touch points within those departments are doing. And it really drives accountability across the business because none of us want to be at the bottom of any leaderboard. They close the loop with customers. So they've set up automated alerts that are triggered by either a low score or keywords like unhappy or lag time. And maybe most importantly, they're going beyond survey scores and really digging into the interaction. So they've combined survey scores with our session replay capabilities so that they can really go deep into the interaction. And what they do every Monday during their digital business review meetings is they walk the digital team, the CX team walks the digital team through where customers are struggling, and they're actually seeing that through the recorded session. And then they work together across teams to prioritize and fix the digital channel in that case. So they have a lot of great components across all three phases of maturity.
That is always refreshing to hear. I always like to hear about companies that are doing things, the right way and really pushing the envelope to try to evolve. So as you can tell, one of the big,
I'm going to pop back in. We did have a couple of questions come in on that great slide. So one of them is, what is the best manner and point in time to close the loop with customers? So I know that I'm going to guess that this might be specific per brand, but Faith, do you have any recommendations for that?
The more timely, the better. The more removed it is from the situation, the more a customer might potentially stew. Obviously, it's going to depend on industry, depend on the relationship, and depend on the magnitude of the challenge. But, even best-in-class companies, they've also moved the envelope as far as they're not just closing the loop with those detractors, they're also closing the loop more holistically, letting people know about the changes that they've made more broadly. So, for example, if a website change was made, they might push something out saying, we heard from customers that this was a challenge and this is the action that we took. So that's why this looks different. So it's really about the specific context, but the more timely, the better. That's what we continue to see being a best practice. Obviously, there might be some constraints where you have to go do more homework and understand more of exactly what happened. The more disconnected you are, the more hard it can be to understand that maybe somebody called the contact center 10 times before they left a nasty gram in digital. So that's why it's so important to see that holistic view, because otherwise you can enter, the lion's den, so to speak, when you reach out to a customer. So the more context that you can gather on your side and the sooner you can do it, the better. Great. I hope that answers the question.
I think so, yeah. Ben, did you have any thoughts on the way and the when of how to close the customer loop?
I think Faith nailed it. Yeah, and I think the only way to do it in a timely manner is to automate it. You have to leverage technology to make it work.
Yeah, as much as it's people, process, and technology, technology speeds up that time to productivity here. And so you have to have the right people doing it, you have to have the right process, and then the right tech to enable.
Yeah, definitely a combination of right people, right stuff.
Yep. Do we have any other questions?
We did have one more come in. It's a bit more, almost kind of a reverse. So you're talking a lot about how we have these siloed teams and what does that look like from the bottom line if you can combine them. What's the inverse? Do we have a sense of the money or resources that are used up because of the siloed teams? So like if you've got redundant roles or a lack of cross-sectional insights, reinventing the wheel, that sort of stuff.
It can be quite expensive. And again, it's dependent on the organization and the investments that they've made. This is actually something that I've been talking to my manager, Harley Manning, about quite a bit is, I've seen some companies really by centralizing streamline costs significantly and reduce the redundant efforts. And on the opposite side, I've seen some companies need to make more investments in some additional resources because of the level of insights that they've gathered by getting closer to this bigger picture view. So there's, unfortunately, and I wish there was, which complicates my job as I'm trying to think about how to lay this out, there's no one size fits all. Some companies might have 7, 8, 10, 15 technologies that essentially are sometimes completing the same activities based on personal preference. Just the technology spend alone can be reduced by, in some cases, millions of dollars. And that allows you to invest in those other resources. So I would be more than happy to have a conversation with said person who is asking this question to understand their situation a little bit more and share something that maybe is a little bit more exact based on their situation.
Great, thanks.
Should I proceed?
Yes, ready to roll.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So as we were saying, it really is time to build that bigger picture view. Success requires connecting all of these dots, and then some. Note in the bottom right-hand corner, it says that this is not all inclusive. So you have to flatten out the silos, drill holes in the silos, build bridges, whatever you prefer to do. CX needs to be a focus at every stage of the customer journey, and everybody needs to be in this together. And remember, it's not just about making things bright and shiny and perfect for the customer. It's also about those business outcomes. By connecting the dots, you're going to see a lot more strategic prioritization. You're going to be able to move the needle on those things that truly matter more at that enterprise level. And with that, you have to be very agile, you have to be adaptable, you have to be willing to change and innovate, and I think that that's one of the things that we continue to see in this space in particular is, it's moving really fast. There's a lot of different, tools and technologies that can help you, but you have to have that collaboration internally first. You can't let that be what holds you back. Because if you do, you're putting your program at risk. And, at the end of the day, it is about better for the customer, better for the culture, and better on the business outcomes. So one of the other things that I often have a wheel that talks about the 4 key elements of VOC programs: listen to the customer, interpret and analyze, engage people and act, and then monitor and improve. But we talk about the real voice of the customer. So your customers are telling you a bunch of different things about the experience that you're delivering as a company, whether they call into your contact center, they use a chat, they might send an email, they might use a secure message, they could use a comment card on the website, they might even talk to an associate or a manager in a store or branch. But put simply, they're telling you a whole bunch of things about the experience that you're delivering. And so it's not always about soliciting their feedback. So companies really need to do a much better job of tapping into that information that they already have. And so you might have picked up on this from the things that Ben and I have been saying, and the fact that I constantly allude to the contact center as a CX hub or a treasure trove of information. I'll use them as the example just because of that. It's to me, I just think there's such a missed opportunity if they're not connected to a CX program. So we're seeing, and Ben talked about this, automation. Customer service operations continue to incorporate, automation and AI into their technology platforms. It's, pretty much a given at this point. But unfortunately, CX teams don't always have a window into those technologies. So they don't necessarily integrate with them in a more comprehensive program or a more comprehensive fashion. And at the end of the day, this lack of integration was something that was really evident to me when I was going through the Forrester wave process for the one that I had published in February. It means that, companies far too often are not really connecting all the dots. And this is really inhibiting that enterprise from realizing that true value, not only of their tech investments, but of customer experience as well. So I keep talking about this. What they say, adult learning is repetition. It already has a ton of information about the experience. These teams in the contact center, they are hearing firsthand how your customers are perceiving their interactions with you. With every single interaction, whether it be through all those various methods that I noted, being tracked, recorded, and archived, by tapping into that data, you can better focus on the why behind the experience and what led to the need for service recovery in the first place. So why would you conduct a survey if you already can understand what happened and why something needed to change? It can alert CX teams of problems pretty early. Treat these employees like a canary in a coal mine, we sometimes say. They play a crucial role in really identifying problems and highlighting opportunities for improvement. They can alert you to those signs of danger before they become a bigger issue. As the role of the customer service agent changes, and this is something that I learned in my colleague Kate Leggett's research, is that a lot of organizations are actually looking to hire a very different type of customer service rep and change the perception of the contact center as a cost center, and because they don't have to be. So as automation is taking over more of like the redundant, repetitive tasks that these agents are completing, these teams can actually be a catalyst to improving customer experience. I have a report coming out next week that talks about this using an example from Pier 1, who didn't hire people based on their customer service experience. Rather, they were hiring people that were more of like home design advocates that could build a relationship with their customers and establish a very different type of relationship with their customers. And Ben, I think that you have maybe some examples here as well before I keep going.
Yeah, lots of great customer experience examples coming from the contact center. Let me give one that's very time relevant. So during the current COVID-19 situation, one of our banking customers has really done a great job maintaining their focus on the customer experience. As the US and lots of other parts in the world were in lockdown or went into lockdown in March and April, one of the byproducts, as we all know, was things closing. So bank branches closed and contact center volume spiked. In early April, just to put a finer point on that, this bank experienced call volumes that were more than 40% above their normal volume, so significant. And by leveraging the speech analytics capabilities in the Verint Experience Cloud, they learned that customers were most focused and most concerned about branch closures and dirty ATMs. That's one. Second thing was the mobile deposit limits of their banking app. And third was information requests related to either unemployment payments that the bank was processing or other payments related to the Paycheck Protection Program. So the contact center team had all of this automatically analyzed for them through speech analytics. And then they were able to, in near real time, share this information with their peers, which led to the branch teams increasing their focus on ATM cleanliness because we're all more concerned than ever with germs. And they provided this information to their digital teams so that the digital team could put new educational resources online and put together some more online self-service capabilities. So leveraging Verint speech analytics capabilities, they broke down the legacy operational silos between their digital branch and contact center channels, and it resulted in a better customer experience. And also, although they weren't perfectly able to quantify this, probably also helped them reduce the further spike in contact center calls. And they were able to do this without even having to survey their customers. They just leveraged the technology they already had in their contact center.
Which is music to my ears, but you probably know the question I'm going to ask here is I'm willing to guess that without COVID, they might have been a little bit slower to really do this. Would you agree?
I would agree. I mean, I think this bank in particular is customer-centric, but they haven't always worked quickly across the different interaction channels. And this has certainly accelerated that, and I think led to positive results for them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's actually what I've been hearing from a lot of our clients, that they're realizing this is a huge opportunity, which actually brings me to my next point, to really drive that meaningful change.
Before we move off that, we did have a question come through related to the contact center. That's why I wanted to toss it in here. First, there's just a comment that they're really excited that we're calling it a contact center, not a call center. And thank you for that, for acknowledging that it goes beyond just the calls, but it's voice, chat, emails, et cetera. And then a separate question just talking about how in the contact center, there is that perception that it's a cost center. And I know you've hit on this just a little bit, but they're kind of looking for some guidance on how to get CX or digital teams to see that they're more than the cost center and to recognize their potential and their value. I think, Ben, I think your story really illustrated this, but Faith, I didn't know if you could expand on that.
Absolutely. The more successful programs that I see are those that are really tapping into that power. Like I said, the role of the contact center agent is changing. My colleague, Kate Leggett, even educated me on, just some of the things that companies are trying to do now. That contact center role permeates that entire customer life cycle. You have this ability in many cases to be very proactive rather than reactive, so saving companies tons of money. But that's why that business outcomes piece is so important in connecting the dots, because it's essentially, you have so much information there that can be used in a more powerful, progressive, and proactive way. And with the power of a lot of the predictive and prescriptive analytics that we're seeing, it's a shame that not enough companies are taking advantage of it. I believe that the report that I refer to will highlight a number of the ways to help show that there needs to be this connect. But I think a lot of it is just in quantifying those impacts of slowly even connecting the dots. So for example, this was a customer that I was working with, and they realized that based on the type of business they were B2B, that the contact center call would be the best way to go. They started with the contact center, and they've seen a wealth of insights that have allowed them to really start to change that perception by simply saying, we've been able to reduce call volumes by X, as they're starting to build towards something more holistic. They're actually starting to do a survey now. So I think it's about just really starting to connect those dots. They've learned a bunch of stuff, and now they're going to ask the questions that they don't have the answers to be able to be strategic. And that's going to help them, develop their next strategy. And, essentially, I think that it's going to be able to tie back to, hey, if we didn't go down this path that we did, leveraging these insights coming from chat and the calls, we wouldn't have been able to ask these questions, and we wouldn't have been able to go down the path that we are. And, oh, by the way, these two initiatives, saved us or, avoided costs of, I've seen some companies report upwards of $11 million on a project, largely because of the engagement that it was able to drive. And that was an insurance company, and most of it was coming out of the contact center. But I think half of the battle is just really just taking a step back and quantifying, showing the money. And I won't show my age in the Jerry Maguire analogy. I'll leave that one out. But I think that just the more you can do to know that cost per call in the contact center is important. I've asked CX teams this, and I feel like I'm going on a little bit of a tirade here, and I can't help myself. I've asked in numerous environments, how many of you know what your cost per call is in the contact center? You'd be shocked at how many CX teams have no clue. You'd also be shocked at how many times when I was asking Kate about this report that I have coming out, she's like, would you believe that at X company, they said that their CX team, they just don't talk to them. And it was like more finger pointing, like, oh, they don't want to talk to us. They don't want to talk to us. We hear that all the time. I think both people want to help each other. So if it's a leadership thing, maybe a little bit of education here and there will go a long way, knowing that cost per call and just driving that point home. And I'm happy to talk about this again with anybody who wants to chat about it.
Yeah, I think that really addressed the question. So thank you for that. And then we have
I get a little excited.
That's what we want to see. No apologies necessary. We did have one other come in. Again, a little bit about closing the loop that I wanted to just get in here because it does relate to that digital contact center bit. But some customers like to vent about an experience and some want their challenge actually resolved. So what's the best practice for closing that loop for digital interactions?
Well, and I'm going to actually defer to Ben for part of this because I think that there might not be I might not be able to give the right answer that maybe this person is looking for. And maybe you can speak about it in the context of some of what you see with Verint customers. But it's, for those people who vent, you have to acknowledge that you've gotten their feedback. And even if, unfortunately, you can't fix everything. Sometimes it's just the acknowledgement and saying, we're working on a number of initiatives that could potentially impact this. This is why we collect customer feedback. But unfortunately, we can't, if we have 100 things on a list, we can only do so many of them. But trust me, your voice is being heard, and we're trying to do what we can. And here's maybe an interim solution that might be able to help. Or another thing that can happen there when you're closing the loop, especially with like those, the people who just want their issue resolved, it's, you have a wealth of data on these people. And this actually ties back to something that we were saying about connecting the dots as well. You might know how somebody prefers to be engaged. So if you've captured their preferences and you know that Sally Smith in Jonesboro, Arkansas wants to be engaged digitally, something as simple as an email. Resolving her problem might help. Maybe you don't have the resources to call. Sometimes it's about just taking what you know about the customer and trying to do something with it. I guess this is a terrible answer, actually, in some ways. If you know it's something you can't change, maybe that's an opportunity to start to close the loop more collectively. And when you do close the loop, or if the customer actually repeated themselves 1,000 times in a survey and had never had the loop closed, you should probably reach out to them and say, we know that you've submitted feedback about this before, trust us, we're working on a number of things that might make this experience better. But right now, more than ever, and I just read something about the retail industry this morning, transparency and communication goes a long way, even if it's not the answer the customer wants to hear. Now, you're going to have those volatile customers who just want to complain. And those are going to be the hard ones to manage. And so those are the ones that, quite frankly, I don't know if I have the right answer for.
Ben, did you have anything?
Yeah, I'll just add something really quickly. I mean, I think many digital visitors are logging in, so they're authenticated. So many brands do know who it is that's leaving that feedback because they're behind an authenticated page. So we do recommend that if people are behind an authenticated page, there should be a good opportunity through the technology to understand who it is and close the loop through whatever's right for your business. If you have 100 million customers, you probably can't call them all, but everyone should be closing the loop some way. The other thing you could think about is generally people are leaving that kind of feedback because they weren't able to complete something online or they had a bad experience. So the companies that are finding ways to solve that problem and connect customers from one channel to the other are oftentimes avoiding even having to have that challenge.
Great, thanks. I think you did answer this question. So I just also wanted to remind the audience, if we don't get to yours, because we have a couple more that have come in that are super specific. If we don't get to yours, we'll be sure to reach out afterwards. So keep them coming. We'll get you an answer. It just might not be live. But so, yeah, Faith, I think you're free to keep going.
Great. So I guess, part of the message that you might be hearing from me and Ben is that COVID-19, it has created a demand for change and also an opportunity to innovate. So when it comes to your VOC program and your customer listening efforts, you have to evaluate and adjust when, where, and how you collect customer feedback. You have to be able to build a strategy to connect all of the resources and start where you have maybe relationships within your enterprise first. And again, I feel like I've kind of beaten a dead horse with this one too, is you can't forget about the power of your employees and leverage that voice of the customer through the employee. If a lot of organizations right now have shut off survey or they have removed like their net promoter question and have been trying to find, other ways to tap into that customer voice, so to speak, and the employees are just this huge opportunity there. And I wrote a blog post about this that is customer facing or, even non-Forrester customer facing. We've seen a lot of companies even leverage like insights and engagement communities that maybe their marketing team might have been using for something else to drive change. We've seen companies using feedback to develop their external communications plans. So all of this great insight that you're capturing, it could be used to become more proactive, like we talked about with your customers. And one of the other things that I like to say is critical before we give you, some very just tangible steps to help you go down this path is you constantly, and I can't reiterate this enough, you must continue to reassess what is and is not working. Your customers, they're going to continue to change. Their wants and needs and demands and behaviors will continue to change. And, even though this is a best practice for VOC programs in general, it's even more critical right now because a lot of companies were already doing things that really weren't working. They weren't delivering those business outcomes and ultimately was putting CX at risk. So now there's an opportunity to really get started and change. And so these are just a couple of the steps that we think will be really helpful and impactful as you go down this path. So getting started on that path to success, we talked about it, assess what isn't working. Think about what you do want to change. Remember to your customers that you are one company and they expect you to act that way. They don't really care about your org structure as much as you wish that they did. So if you can focus on building those relationships internally with your cross-functional partners and help people come together, that is a great step one. Not everybody's going to be on board, but starting with those people that are on board, that do care, and help them see you as a partner, not as a threat. Don't let fiefdoms and turf wars, as I like to say, get in your way. Demonstrate what you can do to actually help them be successful in achieving their goals. That starts with understanding their goals. I often hear, especially in that contact center environment, well, Net Promoter Score isn't something that resonates specifically with the agents. And so many of those programs have other metrics in place, like customer satisfaction and first call resolution, to be able to better highlight what is and isn't working with the specific agents in the interaction with the customer. You have to demonstrate what you can do to help them, like I said, and really just focus on building the longevity of those relationships long term. The next step would be inventorying all of the data that's being collected across the entire customer journey. And this can be a very shocking and enlightening exercise for many organizations, because sometimes you have no idea how many things people are pushing out there. I remember as a practitioner, and I won't shame where I worked, but we had over 140 rogue survey activities happening outside of our team, which highlighted a need to really go out and educate and focus on those internal relationships. Again, determine what is and isn't being used, and then determine if there's anything missing and incorporate that into your program. As you continue to build the relationships and understand, what is already being collected, start to connect those data dots and develop a longer term strategy. I often talk about there's 3 levels here: short, middle, and long term. Rome wasn't built in a day. Successful programs were not built overnight. So really think about what makes the most sense to connect those dots. I highly recommend making sure that the contact center and digital teams are one of the first stops. Another thing that you can do, and I think that this is something that's often forgotten, we talked a little bit about people, process, and technology, right? Well, tapping into the power of the professional services teams of your vendor. They can help you guide the strategy, help you develop a prioritization framework, help you really get started on that path to long-term success. They're here to help you get to that holistic, unified program and deliver those business outcomes. Remember, you're not alone. And then lastly, I think that this is a great way to get the naysayers and the slow pokes on board, is really just focusing on socializing that impact and the value of all of these efforts. Even those small quick hits, those find and fix opportunities, that will help people understand that the investment in customer experience has been worth it. With that and my long-winded answers to everything, I will turn it back to you, Ben.
Great, thanks, Faith, and great advice. Thank you. So Faith has shared lots of great insight with us all today, and we had some great questions too, so thank you. She shared some very tangible suggestions on how to approach your CX transformations. I'm going to close by sharing one more customer story, and then we'll open it up for any additional questions. So as we've talked about many times today, and as you guys live every day, the current situation has resulted in companies increasing their focus on the customer and the employee experience. And in many cases, we're seeing that CX teams have a more important seat at the table than ever before. Some teams were ready and some teams weren't. One team that we work with that certainly was ready was Cisco's Customer Insights and Action team. And they needed to be ready because they've seen a huge spike in usage across many of their offerings, including Cisco WebEx and other technologies that enable work from home. So as you'd expect, with that huge spike in usage, there's been a big spike in customers contacting them, giving them feedback for all kinds of different reasons. And because Cisco has a quite mature program that's delivering tremendous value, they were really able to react quickly. So as just some quick background, Cisco is one of Verint's larger Experience Cloud customers. They have multiple components of our Experience Cloud offering, and they do leverage our CX consulting team to partner with them to help continue to advance their program. They have very strong executive sponsorship, including that of Maria Martinez, their Chief Experience Officer. And we've been on this journey with them for about 10 years. So it's been a really great story and great evolution. And their program encompasses many of the best practices that Faith discussed. They listen to customers across channels and across data types. They connect those VOC data dots, and they combine VOC data with operational and financial data. And probably most importantly right now, they have a prioritization framework that ensures they're prioritizing the right projects and that departments are collaborating on the solutions. So the sum of all that means that and results in a program and a framework that has enabled Cisco to take really quick and decisive action on customer feedback during this current situation. When the crisis hit, the team was ready because they already had the program and the framework in place to react quickly to new customer demands. So kudos to the Cisco team for the great work that they are doing. They're going to be presenting at Verint's virtual Engage conference in a few weeks. So we look forward to sharing more of their story then. So with that, Ellen and Faith, I think we can open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, we just have about 5 minutes, so I know that there's going to be a couple we don't get to, but I did want to ask a few of these that come through. One is pretty tactical, asking where does quality assurance fit in creating a top-notch CX program?
It is a huge part of it, and I'm going to defer to my contact center expert, Ben. As it's not my wheelhouse. This is more of a Kate thing, not me.
It is a huge part of it. It is a huge part of it. And, quality by definition is providing great customer experience, right? That's a big part of quality. And many of our customers who originated their programs in the contact center because they service many large volume interactions, so insurance companies, telco type companies, they already have strong quality programs, and they're using technology that could be applied to broader CX efforts to drive quality. So quality is certainly a big component. And when Faith talks about connecting the dots across channels, a lot of the data and the information and the technology that CX pros are able to leverage from the contact center originates from the great work that quality teams are doing.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so we just have about 3 minutes left at this point. So I'm going to take a really quick moment to remind everyone in the resources panel, we've got plenty of things for you to download. And we've also got those couple of other webinars that you can watch if you're looking for even a deeper dive here. Wanted to remind our customers who are on the line as well that we've got our, like Ben just mentioned, our Verint virtual conference coming up. So you'll hear more from Cisco. And also earlier in this presentation, we shared a little bit about Vera Bradley, and they'll be expanding on that story as well. So I'm going to toss out this final question. I think, Faith, it might make sense for you to answer it first, but I'll let you guys duke it out once you've heard it. So kind of harkening back to those best practices, one of the recommendations was to connect the dots and to create the strategy to consolidate. And just feeling like that alone seems loaded with challenges, can you break that down into a few specific steps, help consolidate across different departments?
Yep, and shameless plug, I'm actually in the midst of writing a report on this now. I think it's really important to just start with, again, that inventory. Inventory, the contracts, the tools, what's being used, what's not being used, really doing that deep dive into the data and the tools that support it. I think the relationships that you have with those stakeholders, so it really just ties back to those steps, is going to play a role in terms of where you get started. I think also, and I talk about this all the time, there's a big difference between a vendor and a partner. And that's where that role of professional services comes in. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Your vendor, Verint, is probably willing to help you do this. And so just, I think, being strategic, not being in a rush, evaluating what is and isn't working, evaluate the relationship with your technology and service partners, identify the gaps that you want to fill. And, sometimes the contract does play a role. So for example, there was a company that I was working with that had 4 technologies in place that essentially were doing the same things. They were never going to be able to streamline down to one because of certain functionality that they really appreciated about one of the vendors in particular. And so they ended up streamlining down to 2, but it took them about 1.5 years to do so, largely because of the penalties associated with the contract termination. But it's, just outline everything, work with procurement. They're always looking to help consolidate tools. It makes their jobs a little bit easier. I think focusing on building that more holistic program based on those relationships, those 3 steps. So inventory, relationships, strategy. And then just starting to connect those dots and execute on phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
Great.
Yeah,
Ben,
I think I don't have a lot to add. I know we're against time, and I think Faith nailed it. I mean, I guess the one thing I would say and just challenge us all to do as CX professionals is there's an opportunity likely with the data you have, with the technology you have to do more. So I would take a ground up approach. If you're in the contact center, have a lunch and learn, have a virtual happy hour with your digital or your CX team. Tell them what you have technology-wise, tell them the data you have, ask them to do the same, and little things like that will get you a long way.
I agree.
Great. Well, thank you both for sharing your expertise on this webinar. I know the quality of questions that came in, I'm feeling like it was very valuable to the people who are on the line. If you are someone listening and you're looking for more information based on what we presented here, do feel free to reach out. I've got the contact information up on the screen right now as we sign off. So Faith, I want to extend a huge thank you to you. I know that you are as you demonstrated, you love talking about CX and everything that has to do with getting more companies to try to transform and really focus on their customer. So huge thank you to you. And also, Ben, thank you for joining me today as well. So with that, I think we're going to say thank you and hope that everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.